have an exciting discussion planned. We're going to talk about some macro trends or mega trends. We'll make the connections to what that means to the point of sale environment. We're going to talk about examples of disruption, how that disruption is driving innovation. And we're going to talk about value propositions. You've heard this term value propositions come up already this morning in every panel. And frankly, from a PwC point of view, that's the last mile that needs to get solved for. We have a great panel assembled. We have Jim Allen, Senior Vice President and Global Head of Small Business Solutions at First Data. Dusty Lutz, Vice President of Store and Checkout Transformation from NCR Corporation. And Evan Sohn, Vice President, Sales North America from Poynt. So just to get started, I want to read a couple of headlines that have come out in the various industry journals that we all follow since Monday. Payment innovation requires merchant providers to be the jack of all trades. How self-service retail is becoming mainstream retail. First Data shares its plans for enabling merchants to stay competitive with Amazon's checkout free store model. And upgrade time, changing the point of sale. So clearly, in the last 4 days, this topic is generating a lot of buzz. So let's jump right in. Gentlemen, traditionally the point of sale has been often thought of as the checkout counter, where we roam the stores, we collect our basket of goods, and we go to pay. I want to throw some trends out there because what we've seen with Amazon is probably an early indicator of this. Globally, 65 million people live in cities, move to cities every year. Every year, another way said, 7 Chicagos are established globally. There's more than 1 trillion connected devices to the internet, and roughly $250 to $450 billion in flows are going cross-border. So what's the connection to point of sale? What that means is in the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to have 40 plus cities globally with populations of greater than 10 million. Those folks are going to be connected. That's going to drive sharing economies and high service-based businesses. So when you think about the point of sale and those trends, we're not talking about making the form factor different. Maybe that's a stopgap. But when you think about these mega trends, how is that impacting the innovation agenda? Jim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jim, and great to be here. I mean, I think first and foremost, where the checkout is happening is changing drastically. It's not just behind the counter, to kind of your point. Terms, traditionally of omni-channel have now evolved into things like connected commerce. And, what does that mean? It's checking out and conducting commerce anywhere, anytime, in any way that you really want with a connected device. So I think in just the evolution of what our mind actually thinks of as kind of point of sale is drastically changing. And certainly the emergence of the ease of technology and of startups and disruptors to get into the space and deliver new technology that helps evolve the way merchants and consumers are checking out, I think is something that we're seeing pretty drastically.
Dusty, from an NCR point of view, right, and the legacy of the company, going from creating the cash register till now in NCR Silver and some of the recent products, how are these trends kind of looking back over the last 100 years, and as you look forward over the next 20 to 30, what's kind of the process to monitor these things and inform your product agenda?
Yeah, I mean, coming from a company that's been in retail for 132 years now, it's important to know that point of sale is not the cash register. In today's world, it's around a commerce platform that actually engages, interacts, and transacts with that consumer on the consumer's basis, making sure that it's of value to that shopper, not just providing the function of checking out.
Great. And Evan, I think, is the disruptor on the stage.
Yeah.
What are your views on these trends?
We haven't been around for 130 months, so I think that's really great. I spent a bunch of years over at Verifone, so I come with a little bit of a different background as well. I think that exactly what Dusty said. I think the day and age of having, the big cash register is actually what separated the merchant from the customer, was designed because of the big giant cash register going back 130 something years. And that's changed. The Apple Store experience has changed everything. You're seeing that now in Nordstrom, big retailers, and now you're seeing it on the SMB side as well. But I think what's never going to change, or certainly not until Star Trek really kicks in, is the merchant wants to be able to take tender from whoever comes in with whatever tender they walk in with. And as long as that's going to happen, until we're in Star Trek world where no one has a wallet anymore, as a pizza store owner, right? Let's go back to Middle America, or the high-end jewelry store. I have no idea when Dusty comes into my store, how's he going to pay? But I'm damn well sure want to take his money. So whether that's cash, credit, debit, foreign currency, Bitcoin, whatever that is. And our role as the point of sale, among other things, is to broker that transaction and ensure that that merchant gets paid and the money gets taken away, et cetera. So I think that, the disruption is really about how we're delivering these modalities and how we're delivering these technologies. But the fundamental transaction that takes place between the customer and the merchant, because it's just growing, and everyone, does anyone not have cash on them right now? Even a dollar? What was it, 10 years ago they said death of cash? We all still have cash. So I think that's really playing itself out really well.
So we didn't rehearse this, but that was my next question. Cash is not dead, right? So from a global trend, I think a lot of the innovation we're going to get into assumes cash will be dead, right? And this kind of convergence from paper to electronic means. Is there ever a day when cash is dead, and how long is that going to be? And when you think about the opening comments this morning around zero growth in mobile payments year over year, what does that kind of beg for kind of the incumbent tender type of cash?
Look, I grew up in mobile technology. I think the VHS versus beta argument, I think that's all gone. I think the and or is gone. The either or is gone. It's really an and both. And again, roll the clock back 20 years. Imagine walking into a store and saying, oh, I have a credit card. Forget Amex, Visa, I don't take Amex, forget that. Oh, I don't take credit cards, I only take cash. You wouldn't think of that now. And I think that, again, we're still gonna have these multiple modalities of, but then again, on an international basis, you're seeing India sort of move away in the demonetization of their currency, away from paper to electronic. So who knows? But again, here we are, we talked about death of cash. Every decade we talk about death of cash. And what we're really doing is increasing the number of ways. And I think it's really exciting. I think there's no better time to be in our space because of self-checkout and enabling even that small mom and pop in Jim's world on the SMB side, that small mom and pop to really have technology that Nordstrom has. I think that's really incredible.
So Jim, on that point, how do you balance, when we think about scale and supply chain from a point of sale point of view, right? We got to strike a balance between meeting specific needs, and we're going to talk about verticalization and some niche plays when we get into kind of hardware and software trade-offs. But in your business, how do you kind of solve for very specific needs in the U.S. market, but then leverage some of the scale and distribution power that First Data has globally, so that you're not kind of creating bespoke solutions in some of these regions that Evan's touched on?
Yeah, a couple things. One, obviously, we have customers from small to large, and there's a ton of learning in how you're serving those enterprise customers and the technologies that you build at scale. And then how do you bring that down market to really enable those small business customers with the same tools that enterprise clients have had for years and they've just never had access to, right? So I think that's a huge piece of it. The other is really kind of this shift from payments facilitation even into a platform, a commerce platform that's solving business solutions and business needs well beyond just payments. And certainly for the small business customers, whether that's running front of the house, running back of the house with accounting, and everything in between. But, we're really seeing a transformation, I think, of what is the experience of having a payments provider, having a commerce enablement provider to really more business solutions, and certainly delivering that on mass scale with all those learnings from the enterprise side.
And before we shift, are there any other trends that your organizations are tracking beyond kind of urbanization, connected commerce, these types of things? Is there anything else that's kind of influencing the POS agenda or the broader enterprise strategy that's relevant for this conversation?
I think one of the mega trends that we watch very closely is just the whole digital enablement of everything. Having information at the fingertips that empowers the consumer to know more than they've ever known and have more control over their choice and their transactions.
Great. So let's shift the conversation so we talked about trends, and I think we could spend the whole session talking about them. But let's take those trends and how they're kind of turning into action through innovation. A couple of statistics kind of baseline this discussion. As a firm, PwC estimates that total POS, the revenue pool from POS globally is around $14 billion, $13.8 billion as of 2014. And profits from that revenue pool at a nice margin of around 48.5% or $6.7 billion. When we dug into those numbers a bit deeper, 71% of that number was from software, right? So we're clearly seeing a shift going from how do I create a cash register 100 years ago and kind of the form factor to the brains inside and the analytics and the data. Is that consistent with your experience and kind of how you're thinking about point of sale or point of interaction?
Yeah. I mean, certainly the magic that's happening in connected commerce these days is all in the software. Software that's enabling more capability, more choice for the consumer, more choice in the payment methods, for example. That's all software driven by and large. There's still an underlying hardware platform that enables that in a lot of modalities, but the real investments and the real disruption and the real investment has to be on the software side to enable these new experiences.
So Jim, I want to pivot to you.
Yeah, let me just maybe chime in on that. You know, it's a real example, not a commercial, right? But you think about First Data and what we're doing in the small business space and this platform called Clover. And a lot of people look at it and they go, well, you've got a POS system and it's a piece of hardware and you're writing the software. And that's completely kind of missing the intent of where we're trying to go. And that is delivering a platform that certainly has hardware manifestations, but it's also online and on the web. And it's really a platform for other software providers to operate on. And examples like an app market with over 240 applications that span everything from employee management to printing images on a receipt and everything in between. But really developing a platform for others to come in and deliver value-added services that we never thought of, never dreamt of, or certainly wouldn't go after ourselves.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jim, and a huge giant fan of Clover and what they've done in the market. You know, I think the big trend, and I'll tie this all together, is the consumer's walking in with loads of technology, yet the store owner is not. You know, the store owner has something that is decades old technology. And what made smartphones smart is not that it's got a really cool music player, right? That's not really what made it smart, or Angry Birds, right? What made it smart is that all of a sudden it became an open platform where anyone could actually develop an application on it. And that's what really made it smart. Mobile devices before, Palm Pilots, you know, you keep going, Motorola, Nokia, there were mobile devices, but the platform to actually build on top of it wasn't as easy. And I think as the smart terminal really starts to manifest itself, where now the owner's nephew or niece can actually write an application that does integrations in there, that's really what's going to be real exciting. And to take this, you know, you look at your phone, the fundamental core of your phone hasn't changed. You dial, you get call waiting, you got caller ID. You know, that was the phone evolution. And now it's the apps that really have incredibly catapulted this market into $1 trillion market. And I think the exciting part is to be able to start addressing not just, you know, you look at what we've been able to do, and again, you know, making broad strokes, you know, gift, loyalty, cashback. You know, that's been our innovation. That's our call waiting and our caller ID. And all of a sudden now, in the next 3 years, you'll see wine applications and all these things, really targeted dentistry vertical applications. And that's just going to be real exciting.
So let's unpack that a bit, right? Because I think, and by definition, the term payment API means many things to many people, right? But from our point of view, it was APIs that enable commerce, right? So whether it was independent of a loyalty transaction or a credit or what have you. Between 2009 and 2015, payment APIs published grew at a rate of 105% a year, right? So this notion of open, I think we're all saying the same thing. I want to just maybe pressure test that a bit, right? Because we've got Poynt, we've got the NCR platform, we've got the Clover platform. As a firm, we advise a lot of merchants and retailers and other acceptors on payment strategies, acceptance strategies, the connected consumer. One of the challenges that I want to discuss here is that there's, similar to iOS versus Android, right? At what point am I going to have to pick to go down a Poynt platform or a Clover platform, or frankly, an iOS platform that's perhaps a bit of a challenge to each of you on the stage? So is it open, really open, I guess is the question, or are we going to force at some point the accepting community to pick a standard or two and go from there?
Right, so I would really define, sorry guys, do you mind? So I'd really define open as I don't need to sign massive amounts of documentation, spend lots and lots of money, and attend a boot camp in order to do a simple basic integration or a basic application. Yeah. And that's kind of how I would define open. And you know that's really what's transformed the mobile phone industry. And I think it's really going to have very profound change on the terminal industry. You look at the cycle times that we've had from a terminal basis, and it's really not kept up in pace with the rest of the technologies. Now we're going to say security, we're going to say all those things. That's great, but it has to start with security. It doesn't end with security. It starts with security, and I think that's really part of what makes it open. Go to the website, go to the Clover website, go to the Poynt website, look at developers. We get calls from developers all the time. How do we develop? Go to the website. It's not a complicated thing to do.
Dusty, what are your views?
10CR open doesn't mean one industry standard. What it means is an open and available and easy to implement set of services that lets the creativity be unleashed in the development community. To be able to implement something that can be stood up in days, not in months or years.
But this gets to this point of I got to kind of conform to the NCR spec maybe versus a Clover spec if I'm a merchant. So Jim, what are you hearing this as you engage, maybe not the smaller merchants, but some of your mid and enterprise level customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty of a platform, and fundamentally, I really believe, right, we'll see the emergence of just a small set of platforms long term. I don't think it'll be a tremendous amount. But the beauty of a platform is that it's modular. There's components to it. You talk about Android or iOS. There's nothing, just because Clover as an example is an Android platform. There's nothing prevent an iOS tablet-based POS consuming an API that has that hardware as an extension. It's completely open and capable to do that, and I couldn't agree more with what Dusty said about just the whole shift from a developer lens and the time of consumption is drastically different than 5-10 years ago. Things that took 12 months, 18 months, there's an expectation that it takes months, if not weeks, if not days, right? So it's a whole different mindset in consumption, using, and actually being up and running.
So let's talk about the innovation lifecycle for a moment as we're on this topic, right? Many of the folks that'll be on this stage, we're on the stage this morning and this afternoon, in addition to yourselves, you're in a fundamental B2B to C business model. So you're having to solve the needs of merchants and acceptors and retailers, but they're trying to kind of get innovation off of your back as it relates to consumer engagement. So when you think about your innovation pipeline and your product roadmaps and what have you, how's that trade often kind of discussed and handled? So Jim, why don't you take that one first?
Yeah, look, we're certainly pivoting over the last couple of years as a company of a fundamental payments provider to a technology company and a commerce enabler, and that means going upstack in the product from payments and all that flexibility. That's certainly kind of table stakes, but to how do you develop the software and services on top of that that really help a merchant do more business with their customer at the end of the day, right? And if you're going to be successful making that shift from traditional commoditized payments type of revenue streams into upstack services and solutions, you've got to make that shift. And we do it, very intentionally from, obviously, dedicated functions like innovations labs within the company, but that's just an igniter for getting the philosophy out across a broader group, because innovation's got to happen in every place.
Dusty, what are your views? And I wouldn't suspect many folks would say, whether it's NCR Corp or one of your peer companies, they spend a lot of energy on the voice of the consumer, right? So we talk about voice of customer, and then we get into kind of this enterprise customer. So where's the kind of level of investment between true end users and consumers versus those that buy and procure?
I think for anybody in this industry to be successful in the medium to long term, you've got to have the consumer at the center of everything you do. These platforms that we're enabling isn't about helping the retailer be more streamlined or more agile. It's about letting them engage and connect with their consumer in the way the consumer wants to. And that's really the key of it. And that's why we do extensive research on the consumer trends and needs and desires, and work with universities around the world to help us engage with that.
Great.
So the only thing I would probably add is just a different angle, is our distribution channel is also a hurdle. Right? Because the ecosystem that we've created as an industry is that there are the direct-to-consumer sale, other than Square, really, and that's probably one of the reasons they were successful. They took some innovation and they went right to the consumer for it. We are really dealing with, and again, this is really more on the SMB level, maybe a little bit more higher up market, a distribution channel that also needs to be educated along the way. And I think there are some really built-in hurdles around there, right? You're really go back 2 decades ago, and you're looking at the old school. Everyone who booked travel went through a travel agent, and all of a sudden that had to morph, right? Because we're doing it all online. And I think that the overall ISO industry, the MSP industry, the acquire industry, They're all going to go through an evolution going from sort of processing salespeople. And again, you look at the technology that they had and what they were selling processing. The terminal did processing. That's all we're going to really talk about is processing. Now we're really transforming them into business consultants, right? And that's all part of that story. The story really is, hey, Mr. Merchant, how can I help you, right? How can I help you with your business? How can I help you grow your business? How can I help you save money? And again, that's all part of, that's a higher up, that's a little bit more higher up than saying, how do you interact with your consumers, right? How do I help you with your business now becomes part of that conversation.
Right, and this is the yin and yang I was kind of probing on. I think, Dusty, from an NCR point of view and your distributor network, right? There's many masters to serve, and I think that's, Evan, that was the point you were making, right? Around the consumer, the end purchaser of equipment, and the software that's resident within that equipment, and then my distribution partners, right? How much are you pushing the innovation roadmap on those constituents, right? Probably the distribution channel and or the merchant versus how much, what's the dynamic between how much you're pushing around saying, hey, this is coming versus kind of using them as a source of information and kind of pulling in to inform your own strategies?
So when we talk about store transformation and helping retailers stay relevant, we're not just pushing, we're preaching to the retailers that if they don't look up and pay attention and change with the market and ahead of the market, they're going to become the next Sears, the next Macy's that's quickly becoming irrelevant. And that they have to not just embrace change, but accelerate that pace of change.
Right. So let's pivot. So we've talked about trends. We've got some examples of innovation based on those disruptive trends. Let's get into value, kind of the meat and potatoes of the conversation. Some data points to ground this conversation. We did a survey of over 1,000 merchants, similar to Accenture. 77% of those participants listed analytics or the ability to derive insights about their business, Evan, to your point, as a top 3 key need. And then it went on to say that's tailored for my business. So we're starting to introduce this notion of being vertically relevant, right? And the advent of payment facilitators and ISVs, I think, is kind of a thing we can talk about here. The same survey basically expressed 53% of those respondents expressed their biggest challenge. Number one challenge is the ability to integrate with other business management applications. So what that's telling me is I want more information and insight around how I'm doing relative to myself, my peers, my geography, what have you. And I think Clover made some similar announcements on that at Money 2020. But then what it's also saying is my current point of sale system, and we're going to get into marketplaces here, is still limited to payment. I got to integrate some of these data points into other MIS systems. So I just want to get a general reaction to that statement. And Jim, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts right off of that. Especially in the small business space, analytics is great, but analytics without action is almost meaningless to a small business, right? They don't have the time, the energy. They're wearing 7 different hats as a small business owner to really digest what that analytics means. So it's all about getting the data, showing the data back to them, making recommendations off the data, and then fundamentally helping them actually take the actions. That might be marketing automation type products and solutions on top of that analytics. So it's all about integrating those products and services really tightly together. And I think that's, what you hit on, Jim, is really around the power of a platform that's connected and has these open APIs, because you're right. If they're just delivered separately, it's disparate products that don't actually work together. And we have to go from this mind share of individual products and solutions to it's kind of one solution. But yes, it has many things into it, from analytics and loyalty and certainly payments, but marketing promotions as well. So it's a spectrum and just in a really unified experience so that it's simple to consume.
Evan, what's Poynt doing to address these pain points?
Yeah, first of all, I completely agree with Jim. I think, I don't know who the actual people who responded to the survey were, but 50% of them basically were crying and saying, look, I don't have time for any of these things. So yeah, I want the data, but just make it really easy for me.
Right.
So I don't know whether they really have disparate systems or just no systems, but hey, thanks for the information. Look, I think it's about delivering information at the point that you need it. So we have a mobile application, for instance. So you have real-time access to all your terminals, multiple stores. This way, I don't know if the audience understands that if you're running a basic legacy terminal in a store. So go to your corner, whatever it is, and they're not running a point of sale system from Clover, they're not running an NCR system. In order for that owner to know how the business is doing, they actually have to call the owner, they have to call the clerk up and find out how we're doing, right? Imagine you had to call your bank teller up to see your account balance. We haven't done that since the 70s, right? Forget the 90s and the 80s. We haven't done that since the 70s. So we're millions of devices, right? Billions of dollars, but I have to call the clerk to see how the store is doing. I can't look at anything online to do that. So we're talking about basics. And I think what we're really doing is let's start at the basics. And Clover is the same way on the SMB side. Hey, let's start giving the owner some information that they never had access to. Analytic data that they never had access to. Staffing times. All the challenges that a real enterprise has, guess what? The small business guy has it too.
So what gives those in this point of sale business the right to win there, right? So by getting into this analytics discussion, we've widened the scope or the aperture of those that play, right? From the likes of IBM's Watson down to some point solutions. So why do, maybe Dusty to start, why does NCR feel like they have a right to play in this space, and more importantly, a right to win as we get into this
I mean, if you talk about from the technology supplier standpoint, NCR is a leader in the retail industry, and we're committed to helping our retailers stay relevant in the industries and win in their markets. And that's helping them modernize their infrastructure. If you look at the 70s view, there are a lot of retailers that are still running systems that were stood up in the early 80s. And they're trying to keep up with the likes of Amazon and Square in this new world that are able to turn on a dime. So it's really around both having the vision for where they need to be, but then building the bridge from these legacy systems that in many cases are still running on mainframes into the new modern agile world.
So are we saying that innovation at the point of sale is really the proverbial tail of the small merchant wagging the dog of the enterprise customer, and that we think a lot of the cool things around the pays, some of the insights, because frankly, Walmart's got a department of people that can tell them how they're doing by the minute, right, and product placement. So are we really kind of limiting our opportunity and our pool to SMBs, or?
No. This is about every retailer. Every single retailer is at risk of needing to close their doors in the next few years if they don't stay up with the consumer's expectations. From Walmart down to the corner bakery, they've got the same drivers and the same pressures to be more relevant to the shoppers, to know more about their business, and to provide the right set of capability for their shoppers.
So I want to shift a bit to these marketplaces, right? And Greg Burch, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, Ingenico has been fairly public around their marketplace. I know Clover has been mentioned a couple times today. Poynt, you guys have built yourselves as a POS, as a platform model for other developers. When you think about the value exchange between hardware and software, and then this PaaS or SaaS model, you're doing that not only for the good of the ecosystem and to address needs, but there's a value component for you. How much of this, from a revenue opportunity, I don't want to give it specific numbers, but directionally, will come from value-added services through your partnerships versus your traditional sources of revenue through processing and kind of your internally developed services?
I mean, we're really transparent. We see it as a massive shift for First Data, especially in the small business community. And as you go up market where payments kind of revenue gets compressed, we, again, app market, probably the most mature in the market today, over 240 applications with varying business needs being solved. The majority of those not developed by First Data, by third parties. And certainly they're participating in delivering that value and that revenue, and First Data does as well as deliverer of the platform at that scale. So kind of to your right to win question earlier, it's different for everybody that's in the ecosystem. Traditional players that have massive distribution and scale, I think to bring, we're going to certainly participate and win in certain ways, but small startups and disruptors who are hyper-focused on a specific business need and doing it quicker and faster and better than some of the more traditional and larger companies that might be focused really broadly are going to win as well, but in a little bit different way.
So Evan, these marketplace concepts.
I could have said the same thing, by the way, so that was really great.
I'm going to take it a follow-up question, right? You need to get to critical mass in terms of content, in terms of who's innovating on my platform. But then that starts to open up a new challenge that we've seen in some clients, where I got to make a decision. I'm going to enable everybody and let the market determine winners and losers, or I'm going to try to protect my brand as the platform and manage to a quality standard. Where are you in Poynt and kind of that tussle?
Yeah, again, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an and both. We have a very large customer who built an application on Poynt, and they built their whole business now around selling their value-added application on Poynt. So it's real exciting to watch even a one-off application really driving that sort of value. I do think that companies like Elevon, and they're a very big partner of ours, they're also going to have to balance now at a higher level. Gee, we're never going to just have one terminal, right, and one marketplace. We're probably going to have multiple terminals and multiple marketplaces. Yet, that store owner that you just surveyed before, one of the things that they probably replied to is, I want one number to call for help. That's going to help me with all these things. So I think there's sort of that balance and that conflict between open and wild, wild west of applications, and yet someone's got to be able to make sure that store could settle. And if the store clerk downloaded Angry Birds for their terminal and it's doing something nasty, that's affecting the day-to-day commerce. So I think there's certainly that challenge there. And we're building an infrastructure that really allows everything from sort of open, free range, and allow us to sort of vet out the applications. We've had thousands of people download our software development kit, literally thousands. And we're being very selective in which applications actually make it through the process, because we don't want the Angry Birds on the terminal. We want the real high value ones. And then there are folks like Elevon that, their priority is to make sure that they could support that customer the same way they've been supporting that customer for decades. And just because we're adding new and exciting technology doesn't mean that they're still not have to take that phone call at the help desk and say, let me help you get paid.
So you're touching on something, and Jim or Dusty, maybe you can take the question. So we talked about the B2B to C model. We've added a B on the front end of that, right, through these marketplaces. And when you look at some of those that would classify true disruptors like a Square in this space, it's very hard to find a phone number to call. So when you talk about the value proposition, and I'm going to go, First Aid has done a good job as Clover as a brand and branding that. Poynt, similar, right? NCR, I think, has done similar aspects as well. How do you solve for one phone number to call? Because typically and historically in merchant services, that's been the rep that signed them, right? And that introduces the challenge of that rep going from selling processing to selling value-added services, and there's all kinds of challenges we could spend another hour talking about there. So how do you, now that we've added a B in the B2B to C to C model, how do you kind of handle that, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, first, there's no one way to interact from a service perspective. Sometimes it's still phone. Please pick it up. Don't actually send me to an IVR most of the time. Mm-hmm. A lot of it's chat through these advanced platforms where chat was never possible. It could be even video, real-time video help through some of these platforms. So I think that is, you got to do it in many different ways. There's no one answer, one right answer. Certainly as you have other technologies being delivered on the platform, who the customer calls for what can get really confusing, especially if they don't have dedicated armies kind of focused on understanding their infrastructure. So that's a critical piece. I do think, though, just kind of a marketplace generically, we look at it as very much it's got to be open, but we are kind of looking at it from a more thoughtful, it's got to be a little cultivated on top of open. If you've got a business service that's critical to a small business and maybe doing something that's actually in stream of the payments, it can't be two guys in a garage that actually built that application and deployed it, and you have no way to get a hold of them with a phone number, and you certainly don't know what kind of technology infrastructure they have in terms of staying up 24/7, 365. So I think those are all really, really big concerns that, some of us have scars already, learning from that, and a lot of us are still learning.
The only thing I'd probably add, and I completely agree, the delivery of the service, there are lots of ways you could build that into the technology. But the other is it's not a sprint. It's a marathon. We're taking merchants who have been doing something a certain way for a very long time. And when I say merchant, I mean an ecosystem that's been doing something a very similar way. And it's not I've had more conversations that start with, well, how many apps do you have? And I go, well, how many do you want? Right? Do you really want to have 1,000? Or is it really the 2 that are going to make the biggest impact to your business? So it's not a quantity game. I think we've all been sort of tainted by the iPhone and smartphone world where you want to see 1,000. Do you really want to see 1,000 apps, or you just want to see the best?
I got to play off of that. So I think the average is 26, 27 apps per consumer is kind of what
That's
you use
right.
on some normal basis. I'm telling you, especially for kind of small, medium size, if it's 3 or 4, you're doing a great job.
That's right. That's
You're
right.
doing a great job.
So someone said to me, so we want to make sure that you don't have 20 different, let's just call it wine store applications, but really? Really? There should probably be 2.
Right.
The one and the other one, right? Or the 3, the guy who's really good at it, the guy who's second, and the guy who's trying, one of those things.
So let's use that as a jumping off point as we think about the future, right? And this, again, we didn't rehearse this, Evan. So one of the questions I want to throw out here, what's going to have a higher probability to win and succeed? A robust point of sale with an adequate marketplace, or an adequate point of sale with a robust marketplace, given everything we've spoken about and the shift to value-added services? So, I don't know, Dusty, you want to take the first shot at that?
I've got to say it's not an either or. It's got to be both. You've got to have
You got to be adequate at both or robust in both?
robust in both. You've got to have a robust system to run your core business, and you've got to have a robust marketplace to unleash the creativity and allow you to innovate at speed and pace to keep up with the consumer's needs and desires.
Evan, what's your
Yeah,
view?
no one's ever asked me that question, so it's pretty good because I really come from a mobile background. So when I first bought my iPhone, I actually thought the phone was not as good as my existing phone. The music player wasn't as good as my existing music player, but I still bought it, right? Typing, going from being able to really write on a BlackBerry to barely be able to, poke out like a line, a sentence on the iPhone. Everyone's laughing now, right? Was just horrific, right? You could literally write Tale of Two Cities on a BlackBerry, and you couldn't spell Tale of Two Cities, on your iPhone.
Without Siri getting in the way, right?
Yet, where's BlackBerry? Anyone? Right. Okay. So I think that the answer to that question probably is it's the platform behind it, and everything else sort of catches up, right? Apple just proved it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's both, right? But you do both by the platform and partnering.
That's right.
Because you're never going to do it all by yourself.
Exactly.
Right? So you're going to do it with the platform. So I think big themes are software is disrupting hardware, clearly. Platforms are disrupting products, clearly. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know where the POS is going to end up, but we think we got a hell of a platform that's going to help figure it out. And some of that will be you in the room, frankly.
Yeah. And last question, I'm going to tweak a bit on kind of having you give your own predictions, and I'll just lob maybe a grenade out here. Is the POS, as we understand it, dead, and is it really the thing in my pocket in the next 7 to 10 years? So all the R&D that's going into form factor, dual screens, swivel screens, and the like, is that just a stopgap measure? And truly, and I think there was a CEO of an Atlanta-based company, a former CEO of an Atlanta-based company that would say this. He's like, the point of sale is in my pocket as a consumer. And when you look at what Apple's doing around mobile checkout and frankly, what Amazon's doing with Amazon Go, that's not that far off. So I'll stretch it a bit, perhaps from some of the true evangelists to say 7 to 10 years, but is the point of sale dead as we know it? Does it become invisible?
Good.
Yeah, I'll take that one being the biggest point of sale provider
Oldest guy.
in the oldest guy on the stage. But that's the beauty of the platform. The hardware and the actual edge point becomes irrelevant to the capability that you're providing. And there'll still be stores that have traditional point of sale, and they'll be providing a great service. There'll still be stores that offer self-service with these large self-checkout devices. And there'll be stores that have mobile technology, and there'll be stores that don't have walls that still interact and transact with the consumer.
Jim?
Yeah, the answer is yes and no. And some retailers are going to transform their business, and the traditional checkout is going to go away. It will be in your pocket. It will be. But there's others that's not the experience their consumers are expecting from them, and their POS will absolutely stay very similar to what we see today. So I think it's going to be very driven by the merchant, their business, and ultimately their consumers' needs of that business.
Great. Evan, last
Yeah,
words.
I would just agree. I think that as long as there are multiple modalities, kind of what I started with, as long as there are multiple modalities of payment, and we want that to happen, right, as opposed to the store that says, I am no longer taking X and Y payment types, as long as they're going to be taking multiple payment types, I'm going to need something that brokers that. I'm going to need a piece of technology. Whatever that looks like, we'll figure that out along the way in those 7 to 10 years. But there'll always be something that's going to broker that relationship. But at the same time, just picking up what Jim said, I flew over on Delta Airlines, right? We don't take cash, right? So they were willing to say, the heck with you taking cash, because our business, we don't want to have to deal with cash. We're just going to deal with credit and debit. So I think that over 7 to 10 years, you'll start to see companies that say, hey, look, we don't take anything anymore. It's all mobile payment. You got to be running a mobile pay application. Otherwise, forget about it.
Great. So unfortunately, we're out of time. I could spend all afternoon on this topic. It's very exciting. So I think the things to take away are it's all about the platform and the software, and it's interesting times, and it's really changing fast. So thank you, Jim, Dusty, and Evan, and Sean, Andrew, and Nicole, and the rest of the TAG FinTech board and my colleagues there. Appreciate the opportunity, and have a good rest of the show. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Good job, man.
Thanks.
Hey, pleasure.